Good evening, everyone. Welcome to round two. I got some great feedback on last week's class. I hope everyone felt that way. We really discussed, I would say, 2 points. Point number one is that in order to have good relationships, the key to having good relationships is becoming more and more soul-oriented and less self-oriented. And that's not an easy task, but we can make progress as we go through life if we're focused on it. That's the key. We're going to come back to that tonight. We come back to that with everything that has to do with experiencing a good life in this world. Always will always boil down to the bottom line core is soul-oriented, purpose-oriented versus self-oriented. Self-orientation seems to be something that will make me happy because it's about me itself, and it sabotages everything. And that's the key. Then we discussed having empathy, 2 types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy and there's emotional empathy. Cognitive empathy is just understanding what someone else is going through, which is not always an easy task to do, especially when it's someone very different than you, sometimes someone who is a different gender. Just so happens. I find myself continuously becoming aware of something that other people are experiencing that I wasn't aware of, and it's shocking to me that at this age, I'm still completely oblivious to what this person has been going through. But for whatever reason, sometimes just a matter of time, sometimes exposure, I become more aware of what someone's going through. That's cognitive empathy. And then there's emotional empathy, which is literally being with them in their pain, which is even more advanced. But either of the two, both of them are very powerful in relationships because then the other person's not alone. That's connection. And that's what relationships are. It's connection. That's very powerful. So that's what we discussed last week. And you can listen to the audio or watch the video, and you can share it with whoever you want. Don't share it with everyone who you think needs to hear it. That doesn't do well for relationships. But if you want to share it with someone because you just thought it's a great class and you want to share it, without any messages, then that's a good idea. Tonight we're going to be discussing the art of listening. And a lot of here's what I see a lot of. Life is far simpler than we think. The reason why it doesn't seem so simple is because we complicate it. So actually the idea of this course is to actually simplify. That's what we're trying to do, simplify. And I think last week's lesson was relatively simple. I'm not saying it's easy to implement, but simple in concept, clear. It's soul versus body, right? What's our focus? Other or self? Purpose or what I want, right? And then empathy. Can I remind myself when someone's going through something to stop, get out of my own head and everything that I need to do today and get done, and just be with them and understand what they're going through? That's what we discussed. And we're going to be discussing tonight listening, which is not it's a skill that must be developed. It's a skill that must be developed. And it's not a skill that many people spend time developing. You'll know that when you're in a conversation with someone, by the amount of times that they interrupt you, or the lack of patience they have listening to you, or that you just told them something and they ask you something completely unrelated, right? We'll have all of these examples later in the class. Now, I know you never do that, so I'm talking about the other person who does it to you, right? But these are all indicators of the fact that we're not really listening, and so we're going to be discussing what listening actually is. There was a journalist that was in Israel, and someone tipped off the journalist about this very pious Jew that goes to the Western Wall every morning at sunset. At sunrise. There's a special thing. He actually gets up at the crack of dawn so that he's at the point of the recital of the Amidah. That's the height of the morning prayers at sunrise. There's something special about doing that every day. And sometimes during the year, that's very early in the morning. And this guy does it every morning. And so and he's been doing it for 4 decades. So this journalist went over to him and said, I hear that you come every morning and at sunrise, you're at this high point of the prayer. He said, why do you do this? So he says, well, I do this because I'm praying for lasting peace, true and lasting peace in the Middle East, right? Peace in the Middle East, right? So the journalist, as a journalist, asks questions and says, well, how does that feel? You've been doing this for 4 decades. How does it feel to do this? He says, honestly, sometimes it feels like talking to the wall. That's sometimes our experience when we talk to people. Because what happens a lot of times is that what happens a lot of times, let's personalize this, okay? Because that's the idea, right? For us to be self-reflective here. We hear what other people are saying, but we are not listening. We hear what other people are saying, but we are not listening. To hear requires no skill. You just need eardrums. That's all you need. And if you have eardrums, there are going to be vibrations and you're going to hear it. In fact, it may be irritating because there's noise and you don't like noise, right? But that's hearing. Hearing requires no skill whatsoever. Listening is an entirely different thing. That's not just a vibration. Listening is your being engaging with another person. That means that you're actually paying very close attention to what the other person is saying. That's the big difference between hearing and listening. It's a world of a difference. Cognitive empathy, by way of example, will require listening. You can't have cognitive empathy if you're just hearing another person. We have to be genuinely interested in what the other person is saying, genuinely interested in what they feel about the experience that they had. To be interested, like, wow, that's the way you feel. That's fascinating, right? Oh, you feel, I get that. That resonates with me because you think to yourself that you would feel the same way. There's another very important thing about listening. Most people don't like to talk to people who don't listen, right? So if we don't develop the skill of listening, then we're not going to have many relationships. What we often do is feign the art of listening. So we make believe we're listening to some extent, and that person is desperate enough to need someone to speak to, and now we have a shidduch. There I have someone to speak to, I'm partially listening, making believe I'm listening, and now I have a connection. But that's a very weak connection. And what we're going to find is just as empathy can transform a relationship, can completely transform, I would say, our presence in this world, the presence we bring into the world. Likewise, we can completely transform who we are in this world by actually becoming high-level listeners. It's interesting. It's like we think all of these other things we try to do to impress everyone. It doesn't require much. Empathy, everyone's going to love you. Listening, everyone's going to love you. If we learn these skills, practice these skills, these are our top. So relationships require listening. A good way to deal with something like this, many people, when they are first confronted with this and many things, are you a good listener? So many, I'm a good listener, right? So the best thing to actually do is to assess ourselves, to actually see if we are in fact a good listener. It's good to get objective feedback. Another very frustrating thing I have going on in my life, I don't know if you have this as well, is that I discover that there are things I thought I was pretty good at that I haven't been really good at. Like I used to think I was an amazing delegator. Now the truth is, what I've learned over time is, I love the idea of delegating. There's a very big difference between loving the idea of delegating and actually knowing how to delegate. I figured out I'm not such a great delegator, right? And I can learn. I can do better, right? Listening can be the same, right? We can convince ourselves that we're a good listener. The question is, are we truly? Now, we may be. I'm not saying that we're not, right? But it's worth assessing objectively by looking at ourselves objectively. We're not going to do this exercise because it'll take a lot of time, but you can do this exercise at home. If you want to have fun, you can do it with a good friend, right? Just make sure it's someone you can be honest with. Maybe risky, maybe a spouse. Okay? Exercise 2.1 on page 52. It goes through 25 questions. And then you can mark yourself and see where you're at as to whether you're a good listener. You can grade yourself. And they do this brilliantly because they tell you to put a letter between A or D. And then after you do the letters A and D, then you convert it to numbers and do the score. Because if you go straight to numbers, if you're writing numbers down, you already think, oh, a 3 is better than a 4. But a A, B, C, D, I don't know which one's better. I have no idea. So anyway, you may want to do this at home. It's going to be it'll be a very good exercise. What we're going to be discussing tonight is 4 points. How listening. Just a moment. Yeah. So we're going to be discussing how listening is crucial for our relationships. It's important to understand because when we understand how critical listening is to relationships, that motivates us to want to be better listeners. If we just know there's a concept, it would be good to be a better listener, that's not motivating enough. But if we really see how listening is actually crucial to our relationship and we begin to start noticing how our lack of listening is what is hindering our relationship from moving forward or getting deeper, then that's going to motivate us. Second, we're going to discuss how Jewish mysticism motivates us to become better listeners. Now, I just want you to know, this is not a mysticism class. The mysticism we're going to be discussing is going to be very grounded. Okay, but it is going to be a spiritual idea. Okay, a spiritual idea, but it's going to be very grounded. And it's going to be beautiful, in my opinion. And I think it'll be your opinion too. It's really a beautiful spiritual idea. Then we're going to discuss what authentic listening entails. What's involved with authentic listening? What do you need to develop? And then what we're going to do, as we're going to do in every class, is we're going to suggest concrete behaviors that help us become better listeners. Actual concrete things that we can do to become better listeners. We don't want this to just be a philosophy or an idea class. We want to bring it right down to action because that's where the change happens, in action. Okay, so let's begin with the importance of listening for relationships and how it makes relationships better. We're going to be discussing really 4 points, 4 benefits that come out of listening very well. And this goes beyond just empathy. You see, when we are a good listener, it makes us very likable. And what we're going to see is that when a person listens, it enables us to provide for the person we're listening to. Very often, you see, again, I'm going to tell you my trajectory, okay? My trajectory was, I already know what you need before you even tell me. Right? You ever there? I know what you need. Don't give me the whole story. I know, right? And then maybe 10 years down the line, I began to listen enough to realize I actually didn't know what they need. Right? I actually don't know what they need. That's big progress, by the way, right? Big progress. You actually don't know what you think you know. I call it people knowing what they don't know. A lot of people go through life knowing a lot of things that they don't know. It's an interesting idea. Do you understand? You're following me? Right? Like you don't know, but you walk around as if you know. Right? You don't know what another person needs or wants. And like as many people will tell you, they actually don't want anything. They just want you to listen. I just heard this from a couple. She told him, I don't want you to do anything, actually. I don't want you to fix the problem. I just want you to listen to the problem. And that's the one thing he doesn't have patience to do. Right? Listen. Right? That itself is already accomplishing something. But we learn what to provide to another person when we listen. We actually get to know the other person. You can't know another person unless you hear them out. And that requires a lot of listening to get to know them very well. And the third thing is to connect. That when we listen, we actually connect very deeply. And the fourth one is that we align. The alignment I'm going to leave to when we get there. Yes? Yeah. So I'm gonna use a different word. I'm going to use the word masculine and feminine. I'll tell you why. Because you have women who are a little bit more on the masculine side and you have men who are a little more on the feminine side. So we're going to keep it to more the attributes instead of the people, okay? But it truly will show up more by males, right? Males are fixers because males predominantly are masculine, right? There's a strong association between males and masculinity. And women and femininity, right? True. But that's not the point that we're discussing, actually. Here's the thing also. You will discover when you sit down with your girlfriends and you have a conversation, you will discover that while you all may be free to share, right? Share very freely, right? You may see that there's a confrontation as to who's going to share, right? Like I'm trying to get a word in, right? And there may not be so much listening. There may be a lot of talking, but not necessarily a lot of listening, right? So the art of listening is something that we all need to develop more and more and more. And what do you need to do? Who is front and center? If I am listening to you, who is front and center? Who? If I am listening and you are speaking, who is the one who is at the center? The person speaking, right? The person speaking, right? Good? Right, so the person speaking. That means for me to be a good listener, what do I need to be able to do? Be selfless. Thank you. Goes right back to soul orientation. Soul orientation, the world's going to love you. You want the world to love you? You don't need an Instagram account. Right? You don't need that. Which is not a world that loves you. Right? But we become soul oriented. That's the key to everything. We're going to see all of this. I'm sort of jumping ahead of ourselves. There's something very interesting you may be familiar with. The most celebrated holiday, according to statistics, the most celebrated Jewish holiday by Jews. You know which holiday that is? Passover. Exactly, it's Passover. Interesting. You would think maybe Hanukkah, but I think Hanukkah is a close second, maybe. I don't know. With all those presents, how can Passover be first? But anyway, but Passover is actually the most celebrated Jewish holiday. And so you may know this from your Seder. The Torah discusses 4 ways to express the significance of the exodus from Egypt. The whole story of God taking us out of Egypt, the Torah says that gives us 4 different ways to express or teach it. Teach the story of the exodus of Egypt. And each one is in a slight variation. If you look at page 57 in your book. Oh, we never even got through these. Okay. Okay, so if you see, we have figure 2.1, Exodus chapter 12, verse 26, 27. When your children say to you, what is this service to you? You shall say, and it tells us how we should explain to the child about the story of Exodus. Then in Exodus chapter 13, next chapter, it says, you shall tell your child on that day saying, and it tells us a different way of saying the story of Exodus. Then it says later in the same chapter, in the future, when your child asks you, what is this? You shall say. And then in Deuteronomy, in the future, when your child asks you, what are these testimonies, statutes, and ordinances that our God has commanded you, you shall say. Okay? Torah seems to be repetitive, right? It is repetitive if you're not listening. But if you're listening, you're going to hear nuances. And that's what happens when we listen. When we listen, we hear nuances. And when we hear nuances, we discover something that you read about in the Haggadah, which maybe will have more meaning in this Passover. Now that we're discussing it now. And that is that if you listen to the 4 questions, when your children will say, or when your children will ask, the language used for the question is different every single time. So what does Haggadah tell us? That the Torah speaks about, anyone know? It speaks about listening. And it speaks about 4 sons. Right? Keneged arba banim dibra Torah. The Torah is speaking about 4 different sons. What does that mean? It's talking about 4 completely different boys. I have 9 kids. Each one's a different world. No one's a replica. Some a little bit more similar, right? This way, that way. But each kid's a completely different, a different child. The 4 sons, each one of them is asking a different question. When we listen, we begin to hear 4 sons. That's what the Haggadah is telling us. Haggadah is to tell over the story. You have to know how to tell over the story. The only way you can know how to tell over the story is if you know who you're speaking to. How do you know who you're speaking to? If you're listening. That's what the Haggadah teaches us. Okay? So we have these variations. Let's go to text number 1. Just brings out the point. Do you mind? You reading text number 1? Okay, thanks. It should be on. Yeah. There we go. That's on page 57, everyone.
The Torah discusses 4 children. One is wise, one is wayward, one is simple, and one does not know how to ask.
Excellent. Now, if you look at up here, you see the last. If you want to follow along and you go back to figure 2.1, so the son that says in the future when your child asks, "What are these testimonies, statutes, and ordinances?" This kid's a scholar. Statutes, testimony. He knows the whole difference between all these different types of commandments. That's the wise son. Clearly, this boy is a wise boy. He's a learned boy, right? If you look at figure 2.1, I'm sorry, at the top one, when your children say to you, "What is this service to you?" What's the stuff that you guys are doing, right? What is this to you? That's, in Hebrew, in the Haggadah Hebrew, it says the Rasha. Some people translate it as the wicked son. We're a little bit nicer on the screen. We call him the wayward son, which is probably more appropriate, right? But it's the one who disassociates. What's the stuff you guys are doing? You talk to that boy very differently. It's a whole different answer to that kid, right? Then you have, in Exodus, the second one, you shall tell your child on that day. What does this child ask? Nothing. He's a child who doesn't even know how to ask. You see the don't ask? That's going to be the last one. And if you look at the third one on figure 2.1, in the future when your child asks you, "What is this?" He doesn't really know how to express himself. He just says, "What is this? What's this that we're doing?" Right? That is the simple son. What is this? And this one that doesn't know how to ask doesn't ask. Right? So therefore we just say to him, we realize, we listen to what he's not saying. That's also an art. So listen to what he's not saying, right? And respond to that. So what we see from the Torah is that it's critical to be able to listen in order for us to be able to communicate with our children. Different question gets a different response, and listening creates effective communication. So the only way we can provide another properly is if we have the ability to listen. I don't know what to provide you with, whether it's information like here, right? Or it's advice or actual goods, right? Until I understand exactly what you want, right? Like sometimes people will come to ask you for advice. You may have had this experience, and they have an idea. They have an answer. They're seeking something, and you can tell they're seeking something, but they're not telling you what they're seeking. They're telling you what they want to do. And by you asking questions, well, but why do you want to do that? What are you trying to get through that? Then they tell you what they want, right? And you have the wisdom to realize that what they're planning on doing and what they want are disconnected. It's not going to work. But now you've listened. You know what to ask. You can now provide them with what it is that they're looking for. It's like a guy was once asked, "What's the quickest way to New York?" So the man asked him, "Are you walking or driving?" The guy said, "I'm driving." He said, "That's the quickest way." That's not listening, right? That's not listening. A very classic example, I'm sure we can all relate to this. Someone shows up late. Just had this also, actually. Someone showed up late, whatever. There were 2 people involved, and someone showed up late in the other person's comments, right? Which is, it's probably in every marriage. There's one person that's on time, one person's late, and God makes sure they always get married. You ever notice that? All right, I'll leave my comedy for a different time. But anyway, that's God's comedy, by the way. But so the reason why that joke works everywhere, because every couple laughs at that joke, because every couple gets it. So Sam shows up late, and his friend Frank says, "Sam, you're always late. Why do you always have to be late?" Right? So what does Sam say? That's not true. Why are you saying that? I'm not always late. I'm not always late. Something happened, so I came late. Right? And it probably isn't true that he's always late. He's only 90%, late 90% of the time. It's not always, right? But the friend says always. But he's getting caught up in that always, right? And what's happening is then debate ensues now. You are always late. You're not always late, right? Whatever they were going to do together is not happening, right? The thing is that none of them are really listening to each other. Let's just start with Sam. We'll start with Sam, right? His friend's saying, I'm frustrated. That's what he's saying. He's saying, I'm frustrated. And the way he's expressing it is he's exaggerating, right? And he's saying it in a way that makes it difficult for Sam to hear it. But if Sam develops the art of listening, he filters all the stuff out. And he says, what's my friend feeling? Right? Could you imagine the magic of that? The magic of that, right? Of being able to actually hear what he's saying and not get caught up in all of the defensiveness that we get caught up in. And then you can just deal with frustration. Buddy, it's going to be okay. It's only 10 minutes. We didn't lose too much time. I apologize. I didn't mean it. Let's get on with what we're going to do. Boom, and the whole thing's gone. Right? But that requires listening. That's what we're talking about. So Sam is technically correct when he says it's not always. But, and the friend never meant always. He meant I'm frustrated. But there goes, that's because there's no listening. So we can only provide if we listen. Let's go to figure 2.2. Just very simple. So we have this listed. Understandings that motivate listening. Listen to provide. If you want to be able to provide to another person, then you've got to listen. Just a moment. Oh boy. Okay. Second point is listen to know. Right? So we have to listen if we want to know another person. More than the parent being, in addition to the parent being able to now answer the child as to what happened with the Exodus, the parent now knows who their child is. I know that I have a wise son. I know that I have a kid who's rebelling. This is important stuff to know, right? I know that I have a kid who doesn't even know what to ask. I've got to provoke him myself. Or I know I have a kid who's a simpleton. There's no problem with any of them, actually. There's absolutely no problem with any of them. They're all going through their process, as we say, and being who God created them to be. The question is whether I, as a parent, know who they are, and whether, now that I know who they are, I can actually respond to them. Interestingly, when we read in the Haggadah about all of these four sons, the Haggadah uses a certain language. Let's read text 2. Allison, you up for reading text 2? Great, page 859.
Four types of children inquire according to their respective natures. This is the deeper interpretation of the saying, the one who is wise, what is he saying? If you want to know what is he saying, analyze his saying. The same applies to all four types of children.
Okay, this is a little bit of a play on words in Hebrew, and I'm just going to do my best with it, okay? And those of you who speak Hebrew will appreciate this maybe a little bit more. It's by every one of the sons, it says, Chacham, the wise one, Mahu Omer, what does he say? And then the Haggadah tells us the passage from the Torah that the wise son says, right? So the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe said, broke down this statement by saying, Mahu. Mahu means, what is he? Or who is he? Omer, listen to what he's saying and you'll know who he is. This is always the key. You want to know someone, listen to them a little bit more. But listen, you have to really spend time listening to them, and then you really get to know them. That's what the Haggadah is teaching us. So it's very powerful. When we listen, we actually get to know. So we listen, we know who we're speaking to, we can now have a meaningful conversation. We're not missing each other. We're not just yelling at each other, right? Completely missing what the other person is saying. If we really listen to the point the other person is saying, we can actually have a meaningful conversation. We know the point that they're making. When we're not, because we already know the point they're making, because we met another 100 people just like them, we don't know the point they're making, and we're just yelling at each other, but we're missing each other completely. What is the greatest obstacle to listening to someone and then getting to know them? So there are two main obstacles. One is just, I'm simply not interested in this person. I'm not interested. You ever speak to someone who you're not interested in speaking to? Right? It's not only me, right? Right? You're just not interested in having this conversation. You just don't know how to get out of it, or you're figuring out how to get out of it, or whatever it is, right? You're clearly not listening to the person. There is my understanding. I'm not an interviewer, so I haven't really done much of interviewing, but I've listened to, I guess I've read or listened somewhere somehow about interviewing. And one thing I know about interviewing is to be a good interviewer, you have to have curiosity. And that actually makes an interviewer good. Because an interviewer doesn't just come in with a list of questions. An interviewer comes in, listens to what you're saying, is curious, and asks you about what you said. It's not a prepared question that makes them good. It's when they're listening very well to what you're saying, and then they ask about it. A good interviewer has to be an excellent listener, right? That means that they're interested. Whoever's sitting in front of them, they're interested. So we have to believe in people, number one, to know that everyone's got a fascinating story. And then we have to know that what I'm bringing to this world is that I'm a listener for people. And I offer that to them, someone who listens to them and then gives them feedback. We can't be disinterested in other people. So we have to be interested in other people. And then the second is that we think we already know. That's another major obstacle to listening. So we have to come with an empty mind. We don't know what they're going to say, even though the way they're saying it sounds very much like another 100 people I've heard. But there's got to be some nuances to them that are different. I'm going to listen to those nuances. And you will almost definitely hear the nuances. You hear a person's fears, you hear a person's aspirations, you hear a lot of fascinating things that people express. There's a great Hasidic a great Hasidic character, we'll say. I mean that in a positive way. He was an iconic Hasidic Jew. That would be a better word. An iconic Hasidic Jew who was actually Rabbi Shem Tov's great uncle, I believe. And I've told many stories about him, so some of you are familiar with his name. His name was Rabbi Mendel Futterfass. He passed away in 1995. The last year of his life, he was very sick and he couldn't go to synagogue. And he was a very popular person. He was a beautiful person. He's a magnificent person who had suffering in his life beyond belief, including sitting in prison for 20 years, which was the easy part of his struggles. He lost numerous children. He went through an enormous amount, but he was a man who embodied Hasidic values. What we're learning, he was an embodiment of. You'll see that in 1 second. He was just a beautiful person. And this last year of his life, he was bedridden. And he was in London. Russian Jew, lived in Israel for many years. But he had a connection, a base in London where his wife lived when he was sitting in prison in Russia. And he was in London. And so after the services in a Hasidic community, we have what's called a Farbrengen. It's sort of like a Kiddush that we have here, but then we sit down and we talk, share stories and ideas and different things. And so after the Farbrengen, different rabbis would come over to his house, or community members would come over to him just to visit him, to stimulate him, to speak to him, etc. He shouldn't be lonely. So first there was a Mr. Patash that came over to him. I know Mr. Patash has kids. And he came over to me and said, "Oh, Reb Mendel." Everyone would call him Reb Mendel. Someone shared a fascinating story at the Farbrengen today. And he shared this fascinating story. And he stays there for a few minutes and he leaves. After he leaves, a Dr. Lowenthal, another Chabad Jew in London, a prominent professor, comes to Reb Mendel. So Reb Mendel, by the Farbrengen today, someone shared an amazing story. And he shares the exact same story. Exact same story. And Reb Mendel listens to the whole story. Right? Third time, Rabbi Shmuel Lu. Anyone hear Rabbi Shmuel Lu? He spoke right here in the synagogue from this podium. Right? Right? And Rabbi Shmuel, who's a prominent rabbi in London, comes after Dr. Lowenthal. He says, "Reb Mendel, how are you? Good Shabbos." A story we heard today was an amazing story. Shares the story for the third time. So his aide that was there said, "Reb Mendel, why didn't you just tell them that you heard the story already? I mean, you're listening to the same story 3 times." So he said, "I did not hear the story 3 times. I heard 3 stories." You know why? Because he listened. And if you listen to someone tell a story, I remember once I was in a car, in the back seat, I was then, I don't know, I was like 22 years old. I'm somewhere around there, somewhere between 22, 23 years old. Actually, I think it was, 22, 23 years old. I was sitting in the back seat, and in the front seat, in the passenger seat, was a young man who today is a world-renowned speaker, who many of you know. One of the most dynamic speakers in the Jewish world. And I had traveled with him upstate where he gave a class and then traveled back, and I went in the car with him. And I shared a story. I remember the story I shared. And he said, he listened to the story. You know, we were sort of like friends. He's like a couple, maybe a year or two older than me. And he said, he made a comment on the way I said the story that I am very particular about the way I say a story. And he's right. I am particular about the way I say a story, right? In other words, he listened not only to the story, but he listened to the nuances I was saying, which was interesting. He listened to the story, right? That is an art because you learn about the person. So he not only heard a story 3 times, but he heard 3 different stories because it was told differently by each person without a doubt. We all say stories differently. And you learned about the people telling you stories by the way they told the story. You learned about the person, right? And that's the point we're talking about. You get to know the person when you actually listen to the person who's telling the story. So what we have, point number 2, so listen to know. You get to know the children that you're dealing with when you listen to them. And if you go to figure 2.3, which is on page 59, we listen to provide. We know what to provide. And then we also listen to know so we can get to know the person. Knowing the person is a relationship. That's what relationships is, right? It's getting to know the person. And then the third point is listening to connect. Okay? You may have read a book which is pretty outdated now. We have probably another 25 million self-help books since then, but this is a very good one, actually. Can't say that about all self-help books, but 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was a major bestseller. Yes? Okay, you read it. You know who wrote it? Very good, Stephen Covey. And one of his 7 habits of highly effective people is make sure that how does he say it? I'm forgetting exactly how he says it. He says something to the effect of, let me see here. Oh, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. It's great. This is actually very, very, very true. The main thing is keep the main thing, because very often we lose what the main thing is. We get sidetracked with a lot of things. What is the main thing about listening? The main thing about listening, the main thing about relationships is not so much to listen to provide, and not so much to listen to know, but it's to listen to connect. That is the main thing about listening. When I listen to you, I am connected to you. The byproduct is I'm also getting to know you. The byproduct is that I know what to provide you with. The main thing is connection, because what we seek in this world more than anything else is connection. If you have powerful connection with one person in this world, you're a very lucky person. You're very blessed. You're a very blessed person, right? That's what we crave as humans, even introverts. All humans seek connection, whether it shows up in a very noisy atmosphere or a very quiet atmosphere. We're all seeking connection. And that's the main thing about listening to connect. Let's read text number 3. If you don't mind. Thank you.
Show me your appearance. Let me listen to your voice. For your voice is pleasant and your appearance is comely.
Oh, beautiful. How romantic. Right? You can put this in your next card. Right? Do you know who wrote this? A very, very great holy Jew by the name of King Solomon. That's who wrote it. He wrote a book called Song of Songs, and Song of Songs is a very romantic book, and it's a story about 2 lovers, a man and a woman who are in love. It's very, very romantic. And guess what? It was all written as a metaphor. Because the romance of King Solomon was not between a man and a woman. The romance between a man and a woman was just a reflection of the ultimate romance. And the ultimate romance is the romance between God and the Jewish people. God being the male and the Jewish people being the female. That's the way it is in the relationship between us and God, which we're not going to discuss tonight. Okay? So what he's saying is, show me your appearance, let me listen to your voice. God is speaking. The male is speaking here. For your voice is pleasant and your appearance is comely. You know what God's saying? Your voice is pleasant. God says, you know why I want you to pray? Just imagine this, by the way. It's not imagination, but envision this would be better. Envision this. You know why God wants you to pray? Because God loves to hear you speak to him. Does God need to get to know you better? No. God knows you a lot better than you know yourself. Does God need to know what to provide you with? No. God knows exactly what you need. That doesn't mean we shouldn't tell him what we need. That's a prayers class, though. Okay? We still should pray for what we need, but God knows what we need as well. But you know what God wants? Connection. God wants us to connect with him. That's exactly right. And when we pray, we are connecting to God. When you take a few minutes every day to pray, you're connecting to God. And what happens when you connect to God, because God listens, right, is that not only does God feel this pleasure, let me listen to your voice, but you actually begin to feel connected as well, because relationships are a two-way street. And that's what listening is mostly about. It's mostly what it fundamentally creates is connection, which takes us to figure 2.4, which is listen to connect. Listen to connect. Okay, we're going to get to the fourth idea, but this is a beautiful mystical idea. And I want to tell you something about this. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say this just in case this may help some of you. Okay? If you speak to any person who's a very developed person, when I say a very developed person, it means that they are a person who has really refined themselves and developed their character. You may have encountered some people. I've encountered certain people who are magnificent people because they've really worked on their character. Like when they do a class on listening, they really apply this to themselves. This is not just ideas. They have exercises, and they check in on themselves every day. And when they mess up, they reassess why they messed up until they become a really good listener, which is what I'm encouraging all of us, including myself, to do, okay, from this class. These are magnificent people in their personality. They're really beautiful people. And they will tell you exactly what I'm going to share with you now. And I'm saying this to tell you that in case the idea that this is a Jewish spiritual idea makes it more difficult for you, which I hope it doesn't. But sometimes we have some baggage with Judaism, which is fine, right? I want to encourage you to know that many people engage in this idea in order to actually develop themselves significantly. The animal soul is the biggest obstacle. The animal soul is the biggest obstacle to listening. You know why? As we learned last week, the animal soul is not interested. My animal soul is not interested in you. Sorry. I'm interested in me. The only part of you I'm interested in is the part of you that's interested in me, or that can help me. Right? This is like the joke. This is like the classic, right? The classic joke about the guy and the girl dating, and they go on a date, and the girl can't get a word in. The guy just won't shut up. He's talking, and then finally he realizes he's been talking for the last 2 hours. He says, "Okay, enough about me. What do you think about me?" That's the animal soul. That's the animal soul. Now, we are sophisticated. We're more sophisticated than that, which is why we're laughing at it. So we'd never do something like that, right? We're more sophisticated than that. Our animal soul is sophisticated, so we would never do that, right? We know that's going to make me look as selfish as I am. I'm never going to show you that I'm that selfish, right? So we're a little more sophisticated than that. But that is our animal soul. Our animal soul is only interested in me, and that's the reason why when you're telling me about something that you're dealing with and it's very emotional for you, and I jump in and say, "Oh, I know exactly how you feel because this is what just happened to me," and I sabotage the conversation, that's animal soul. That's like animal soul classic, right? That's animal soul classic. That's self-orientation, right? Now, it's not a criticism in the sense that it's a shock that anyone does that. We all do that. That's our nature. That's normal. That is normal. But we're trying to rise above normal because normal doesn't work, right? Normal doesn't work. Just being yourself doesn't work. Don't be yourself. We're going to go back to that again. That's unacceptable. Be your best self. That's the self you want to be. But don't say, I'm going to be myself. Yeah, that's why you're yelling at all of the people that you're not getting along with. Well, I'm going to be myself. I'm not going to let you not be myself, right? All that stuff. Because the be myself is actually the problem. We don't want to be our animal self. Our animal soul cringes when you are the center. I cringe. How do I get you out of the focus? I can be in focus, right? And that's why very often we love speaking. Let's see what we got up here. We just did that. Two souls, animal soul and the godly soul. The animal soul is a natural speaker. Oh, does it love to speak? The godly soul is a natural listener. The godly soul always puts the other person in the center, in the limelight, in focus. It's not about me. It's about the other person. It's about how I can serve. It's about what I can do, right? What I can provide. So, providing for another person, knowing another person, connecting with another person, all of this is an expression of the godly soul. The animal soul is always going to make a cost-benefit analysis. And we listen to people to the point that it's worthwhile. The moment I realize that you'll never be my client, okay, I gotta go, I'll see you. Right? Like your whole humanity is gone. That's the animal soul. That's the animal soul. You know, I was recently speaking with someone who I was going to hire for certain things. In the end, I didn't, right? For whatever different reasons. But as I was speaking with this person, the person told me, by the way, if you're not comfortable working with me, that's fine. I will connect you with someone else who does the same thing, and you can work with them. And that's after this guy spent a few hours with me, right? In other words, he didn't drop me the second he knew or sensed I may not be a client. What did he do? He said, I'm here to help you. And it was like beautiful. I told him so. It was really beautiful because it's very rare to experience. It was a tremendous experience. That's a man who was living out of his godly soul. Fellow Chabad guy, actually, good few years younger than I, but he trained in a certain area of business, and he's very skilled. And I actually do want to hire him, but for whatever reasons, it hasn't happened yet. Maybe one day it will happen. I'm not hiring another person, but no, but it was really beautiful, and that was a beautiful expression of the godly soul. So being yourself undermines this. But being our best self, which is our godly soul, living out of our godly soul, which is our best self, that's where we become a natural listener. Okay? So now that we have that, and we already sort of know that from last week, let's jump to the spiritual idea. And the spiritual idea of if God spoke, would you listen? If God spoke, would you listen? Right? If God was speaking to you, do you think you would listen? How many of you, by a raise of hands, if God was speaking to you, do you think you would listen? Raise your hand if you think you would. Okay. I think we got everyone's hand up. All right. Very good. Right? Yes. Oh, you'll have to ask him when he starts speaking to you. Yeah. You could ask God. You can ask God questions. First, I'm going to show you that God speaks to you, and then you can ask him questions. But just know that he communicates a little bit differently than you and I do. Okay? But he definitely communicates. And we're going to see that right now, actually. We're going to see that right now. And I'm going to do this by way of a, let me just see how we're doing with time here. By way of a story. Okay? And I'm going to show this to you in a video. Okay? And let me give you the background of the story, because from the video, it's not as sharp as I would have said it. There's a spiritual way of going through life, which I strongly encourage you to do, which I am trying to do more and more in my life. And that is to see everything that you encounter in your life, whether it's something that you see or something that you hear, something that someone tells you, as God speaking to you. And that all of the things that you don't hear, right? Because everything you hear, there's an endless number of things that you don't hear. right? All the things you don't hear, the reason why you don't hear them is because you don't need to hear those things. You only hear the things that God needs you to hear. And when God needs you to hear something, it's very, very important. So therefore, everything that you hear is very, very important. That means if you come to me and you start telling me about whatever's going on in your life, for some reason, which I may or may not know in this moment, God wants me to know what's going on, this aspect of your life. It may be because I can help you. It may be because I can learn from it. It may be something I'll never know until 25 years from now. But God wants me to know that. Okay, that's the background of this story. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. You may have picked up on this point based on my introduction, but here's this man who can meditate beyond what anyone in this room can even begin to meditate. That means that he's saying his prayers a night, which generally takes me, we just did this prayer downstairs, took us about 15 minutes. He began it in the evening, we'll say 10 p.m. even, and he finished it at 8 a.m. Okay? Why? Because he was meditating on ideas. And then he went straight into the morning prayers. He didn't go to sleep. He went straight into the morning prayers, said the morning prayers for many hours. These are deep, deep, very powerful minds. These are not iPhone minds, right? Or smartphone minds, right? And social media minds. So when this simple villager comes back, he can't relate to it. He doesn't even understand the concept of such a mind. And he just thinks the reason why it takes him so long to pray is because he can't read Hebrew. So he says, I just say the Shema. But him, it's taking him hours and hours to get the words out. Right? Which is really sort of like a complete misunderstanding and also a sort of a put down. And he heard that. This profound man heard that. How did he respond to that remark? He didn't respond to it defensively. He didn't even see it that way. He just heard a comment that God wanted him to hear. And that is that my prayers can still use some help. And from that comment, he did an enormous amount of introspection to be able to see how he can improve his prayers, to the extent that his teacher who was with him said that my 3 years of teaching didn't do as much for him as this one comment did for him. See, that's a person who listens on an entirely different level. Not just listening to what the person is saying, but also listening to why I am hearing, why this is being brought to me, right? Now, in order for a person to live this way, it requires two fundamental ideas. If you go to page 64, we have a question. What underlying beliefs prompted Shalom to be deeply impacted by the words he heard? There are two underlying beliefs here. The first is, he always asked himself, what am I needed for? Not what do I need, but what am I needed for? So that if something's happening, what is this demanding of me? What am I being called upon? If I hear a comment, right, what am I being called upon to do? Point number one, which is a soul-oriented way of thinking. By the way, I was in the city of Sderot. How many of you are familiar with the city of Sderot? In the context of October 7th? It wasn't one of the kibbutzim, but it was a city. It is a city that was much larger than all of the kibbutzim that was under attack. And we heard from a girl who, I don't know how old she was, 22 years old. I shared this, I think, on Shabbos. 22 years old. And she told us the whole story of what happened with her family on that day, which is worthwhile hearing all of these things from the people personally, because, like, wow, it brings it alive. It's, like, intense, right? Hearing this from this 22-year-old girl. Her father was shot by the terrorists on the street coming back from the synagogue. A bullet went through his lung. They didn't know exactly what happened, but he was having trouble breathing. Thank God he's fine, right? But she went through the whole drama and the details. It's like very overwhelming, it really almost hard to listen to. And at the end of it all, she said, "You know what I learned?" This is what she said. It was just amazing. This is a 22-year-old girl, right? She said, "You know what I learned from everything that transpired? That every day when I get up, I should ask myself, what am I needed for?" And because she gave a whole series of people and circumstances that came together that really, in a certain respect, miraculously saved her father, because they were the city was was a war zone, and yet somehow a doctor and many people didn't know it was a war zone yet. So things were happening with people not knowing what's going on, and if a person got to their house, a doctor got to their house, it was a miracle. And that the fact that they were able to carry the father on and get him to the hospital without getting shot was a miracle, which they didn't even know so much at that time, right? So she said, I learned to ask, what am I needed for? That is a spiritual approach to life. And that is a happy approach to life. And that will make you the most popular person in the community, without a question. And you're going to be scared. Your animal soul is going to be terrified. Because if I'm kind of continuously asking, what am I needed for? Who's going to take care of my needs? And you will only have that answer once you ask yourself every day, what am I needed for? And you stop worrying about your needs. And you will see, I think I said this last week too, the Rebbe wrote to many people in letters, you take care of other people's needs, God will take care of your needs. Because that's what God put you here for. The only way you can know is to try it. Try it. I'm not saying to try it 100%. You won't try it 100% anyway. Right? To jump that far just doesn't happen. But try it a little bit, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And then the second thing is, nothing is a coincidence. So if I hear something, it's not coincidental. God wanted me to hear it. What do I need versus what am I needed for? What's the question we wake up with every single day? What do I need? Oh my gosh, I have this and that. Oh, I can't believe that they did this or they did that, right? It's all so focused around ourselves, right? What am I needed for? And nothing is random. Everything is meaningful. Everything is by divine providence. Now, I want you to also practice letting go of the philosophy. I can have a philosophical conversation with you if you'd like, which I'm not here. But if you ever want to have a philosophical conversation, I can explain to you philosophically why this is absolutely true. Okay? However, you may have a hang-up with that. And they say, well, I don't know. How can you be sure? You want me to devote my whole life based on that? This philosophical idea, right? What I'm telling you is, forget about the philosophical idea. Do this for yourself. Just do this for almost selfishly, right? Do this for yourself. Like, give it to yourself. Don't become a philosopher and not give yourself the beauty of what this perspective actually offers. That's really the idea, and this is what this Reb Shalom actually lived by. And that's why when he had this statement, he didn't personalize it. Let's go to text 5. It's page 65.
The Talmud teaches that all that God created in the world, the single thing was created without purpose. This principle extends to all events and occurrences without a whose purposes. For all that transpires is that divine, personal divine providence. Similarly, awareness of specific information is not purposeless. We are not being aware of anything irrelevant to our service of God.
Excellent. So everything is by design with purpose that God creates, and this includes events and occurrences that are happening. Nothing is irrelevant, and therefore this comment that you heard from an ignoramus was not irrelevant, but he knew it was a message that God was giving to him. So what happens is, just a moment. Okay, so what happens is, okay, so the first thing is we have to remove the biggest obstacles. And the biggest obstacles to listening is the information is irrelevant to me. It's super relevant to you. That's why God's bringing it to you. When we are in that zone, then nothing is irrelevant. If you are coming to me and telling me something, it's super relevant, right? And number two is I need to be doing something. I need to be doing something else. We think, no, actually, the only thing you need to be doing now is exactly what God's bringing in front of you. There is nothing more important for you to be doing. So often we're distracted. I need to be here. I need to be there. I need to do this. I need to do that. This is a big challenge. I struggle with this a lot. I'm a person who's always getting things done. You know those guys, always getting things done, right? They can be very irritating. So, because I'm always running off to get something done. Someone comes over to me to speak to me. 1 second, I got to get something done. I don't have time for this, right? And I have to remind myself, you don't have time for this. You don't have time for that. The thing you're running to get done, you don't have time for. Because this is what's in front of you now, and this is what God is bringing to you, and this is what's important. And then just block it all out and just be here. That is that is something that we develop over time. That's exactly what we're learning. So through listening, we learn to provide. We can learn what we can provide. We get to know the other person. Most importantly, we connect with the other person. And lastly, we become aligned with what's going on in the world because we realize this is what God is bringing to us right now. Because what is being brought to me, what's being told to me, is earmarked for me. This is a very advanced spiritual way of living. And when I say advanced, I don't mean advanced in the way that it's difficult or it's out of our reach. It just requires commitment, and with that commitment, we can actually grow this more and more and more, and become a beautiful listener who's really engaging with everything that we're listening to. And so, to the question, if God were to speak to me, would I listen? Well, you have that opportunity all the time, because this is the way God speaks to us. He speaks to us through circumstances. And he speaks to us through what he brings to us, which is very often conversations. And this is the mindset of a listener, to realize that this is from God. So if you look at figure 2.5, that's on page 66, we listen to provide, we listen to know the person, we listen to connect to the person, we listen to align with Almighty God and what God has in store for us. And by the way, when we do this, we are being true to our best self. So if you're a person who likes to be true to yourself, begin being true to your best self, which is your godly soul. And that will keep you busy for the rest of your life. Yeah. The simplest way to begin is to simply, if suddenly while you're listening to someone, a thought that this is an instruction to me or a lesson to me or something I should learn from, that thought was put into your head by God. I'm going to tell you something really beautiful. I'm going to tell you something, this is a gift. I'm giving you a beautiful gift. Everyone here, a beautiful gift. I believe this is a big gift. Some of you may have heard me say this. A woman once wrote to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was, a true spiritual master and man of God. How can I know what my purpose, the reason that God put me in this world? Said that the reason that Hashem put me in this world. So, his response was, Hashem tells you what your purpose is in this world, that is where the thoughts of what you should do come from. So let me explain that. Let me explain that. It's a little bit tricky, and I'm not qualifying it right now because it's too long of a conversation. We're already about at least 10 minutes off schedule. Okay, so I'm not. But if you ever want me to qualify it or whatever it is, or we can do it, I can do it after the class. Right? When I say qualify, what I mean is to just address all of the nuances of it. Okay, but essentially what the Rebbe was saying was, when you have an idea, you know that someone should really do this. You know, it's a good idea, and you have this inspiration that it should be done. That is God speaking to you. That's essentially what the Rebbe said, and that's God telling you that you should do it. And how many of those things we just drop the ball because it's overwhelming, it's too hard, I don't know if I'm the right person to do it, or whatever it may be. That is God speaking to you. So when we have an idea that I want to go to medical school, right, versus whatever, right, that is, we're all wired very differently. There's a reason why a certain person gravitates to this and another person gravitates to that, right? When I was, I guess 24 years old, was married, right? Somehow I knew that I wanted to teach adults. I told my wife I will not teach children when we were dating. I said the one thing I won't do is become a school teacher. I don't know why, but I do know why. but anyway, right? But somehow I knew this. I'm not quite sure how I knew it. I'm not quite sure how I knew it, but I knew it because God wanted me to know it. So I had this in my head that I should teach adults. And guess what? Here I am, right? 26 years later, teaching adults. And it wasn't a mistake, right? So we know, and God speaks to us. And I'm not going to say that every idea that everyone has is a godly idea, right? People have a lot of mishigas. All of us do, right? I understand that. So I'm not qualifying all of that, but I am saying in a general sense, when the person has a good idea, that when you speak to your friends around you, they say that's aligned with you, that makes sense, that's God speaking to you. You know, when you have a mishigas, your friends will let you know if you're open to asking them. Okay. Let's go to the last part of tonight's lesson. Absorption. Okay, so to master listening. So now we're going to discuss actually how to actually become a good listener. By now, hopefully, we're all motivated to become good listeners. The question is how to effectively do that. There's a beautiful teaching of Mishnah which tells us, let's read text number 6, whoever's got the mic. If you can pass the microphone over, thank you.
Elisha, the son of Abiel, would say, learning Torah as a child is comparable to ink inscribed on fresh paper. Learning Torah as an older person is comparable to ink inscribed on erased.
Okay. How many of you are inspired by this, and how many of you are dejected by this? Dejected, raise your hand. Inspired, raise your hand. Wow, that's fascinating. Okay. I thought you were going to all be dejected. But I forgot. It's a class of youngsters, so that's why no one's dejected. But, it says that learning Torah as a child, is anyone here a child? Besides my son. No, we have no children here. It says learning as a child is comparable to ink inscribed on fresh paper, right? Everything that you give to a child, the child remembers. Learning Torah as an older person, I don't know what's older. I know it's a few years older than me. Older is always a few years older than me. I guess that's the way we're all thinking, right? But if it's older is like at an age where you're beginning to realize that you're not remembering as well as you used to, is there anyone? Oh, it's only me, I guess. Okay, it's only me, fine. So learning Torah as an older person is comparable to ink inscribed on erased paper. It's like you put it down and it's like erased. It's not there, right? I don't know. That's not inspiring to me. But here's what the Mishnah is actually is more deeply saying. The Mishnah is saying that is true. This actually is true. We all know this, right? But it's not inspiring. But what is inspiring is this. Every single one of us, when we are learning something, have the choice of coming to what we're learning as a child, a clean slate, open mind. I'm going to listen, even though the person looks like that type of a person. I'm going to listen. I'm not going to prejudge. And I'm not going to judge the ideas as they're saying it. I'm going to listen to what they're saying. That's a child listening. Children don't have preconceived notions, right? They're open. They can take everything in. There's so little that comes in because, right? It's not the way. That's what's going on in the country right now, right? Like you only listen to the news station that makes sense, right? That speaks sense. You don't listen to the other one, right? That means we're not listening, right? And we can't make any progress that way. So that's really actually what the Mishnah is saying. So this is a very big lesson to every single one of us. For an adult to listen like a child. Okay, there's a child's mind which is receptive. There's an adult's mind, I think that's the whole thing. There's an adult's mind which is judgmental. Interestingly, how does a person listen like a child? Well, you may know that listen has the same letters as silent. If you silence your mind, you can listen. If you don't silence your mind, then your mind is filled with preconceived notions and you can't listen. And so everything you hear with judgment. Let me just see. Right? So we quiet the mind, which is full of distraction and analysis. I'm going to explain what these two things are. Quieting the mind is, if I come to a class, let's say, right? I'm studying Talmud. Okay? I'm studying Talmud. And as I'm studying, like I do some morning study. Okay? Which I encourage everyone to do. Some morning Torah study. And when I do the Torah study, what do you think comes to my mind? All of the things I have to do today. Right when I'm studying, all the things I have to do today. So what do? I immediately write down, right? Or I type on my phone the things I need to do, so they're gone. So now they're on my phone. I don't have to be in my head anymore, right? So I got rid of it, right? But that is a distracted mind. There are all these other things outside, nothing related to what I'm studying. But then there's the studying itself as I'm studying, and in part of my study, I listen to a teacher in audio of someone teaching, video, whatever. And when they're teaching ideas, a lot of times we judge the ideas that they're teaching, right? When we are judging the idea that they're teaching as they're teaching it, we are not listening to what they're teaching. The true student, okay, this is a real skill. The true student comes with an empty mind and says, I'm going to hear what the teacher says fully. Just take it all in fully. I'm going to judge it afterwards, but first I want to really understand what the teacher is saying. If we do that, we really get what the teacher said. Afterwards, we can analyze it. There's no problem, right? And we can decide that maybe we don't like the idea. That's fine too. But if we want to be learning, listening, we have to not only be distracted by outside things, make sure we're not distracted by outside things, we have to make sure that we are not being distracted within as well. So when Sam's friend expressed frustration that he's always late, right? There are a whole bunch of different types of thoughts that can come up. One is, it's not true that I'm always late. Now, is that an outside thought? No, it's related to what his friend said. But it's not letting him hear what his friend is saying. Because it's a defense, right? Or he could say, what about the time he came late? Right? He's not listening to what his friend is saying. Under the circumstances, do you know why I came late? Not listening to what his friend is saying. Why do I hang out with such petty friends? Right? I need to find something I can say to make him feel better. Right? So that's what we feel as things sometimes. All of these things are a distraction to actually listening to what the person is saying. Listening to what the person is saying is listening to what the person is saying with a clear mind. I'm not coming up with a defense. Just let me be with them and what they're saying. They're saying that I always come late. If we are with them, we will hear the frustration and we will know they are frustrated. And we will know it's not about the always. And it's just a frustration that we came late and it creates some type of an inconvenience for them or whatever it may be. And then we can address the frustration, which is amazing because then we're actually addressing what's going on. So that is the art to listening. The actual implementation of listening is to make sure that we're not distracted from outside things and we're not analyzing, right, or defending or coming up with any other inner thoughts about what they're saying. Practically, here are some very good listening habits that we have from another Mishnah from the Ethics of Our Fathers. Let's read text number 8, and then we're going to discuss most of these. Not all of them, but most of them. Yeah, page 71.
7 traits are present in a golem, a mature person, and 7
In a chacham.
in a wise person. Wise people. 1. Do not speak in front of one who is greater than they in wisdom or number. 2. Do not interrupt the work of another. 3. Do not ask him to respond. 4.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Ask to the point and answer as if proper. 5. Respond to the first point first and then last point last. 6. Declare, I have not heard when they did not hear. And 7. Concede to the truth. The opposites of these traits are to be found in the golem.
Okay. So if you want to know if you're a golem, which is they translate nicely as an immature person, others would translate it as a dunce, are the opposite of all of these 7. But before we're going to discuss numbers 2 through 6. But before we do, I want to show you this video, and then we're going to discuss them. we're gonna go through these, and I want to say this: these are tactics, if you will. They are indicators. They are indicators that we are not doing a good job listening. However, at the root of good listening is, as we discussed earlier, truly being interested in what the other person has to say, not because we're doing them a favor, but because there is nothing more important that God is putting before us now than what they are sharing. Okay? Whether it's for us to help them, whether it's that what they're sharing is going to help us, we'll figure that out some later time. But right now, I'm just going to be present with what they're saying, and that it creates connection. And there's nothing more beautiful than people connecting with people. So the list that we have over here is, number one is that the mission is, when someone interrupts another person in their speaking, that is a very clear sign that we're not listening. So a person who listens well doesn't interrupt. So we should at least begin practicing catching ourselves when we do interrupt, and stop interrupting other people when they're speaking and just hear them out. Okay, that's number one. Number two is, do not respond impulsively. So responding impulsively means that they finish now, so we learn to be polite and not interrupt, but we just can't wait for them to stop already so I can bestow the truth upon them, right? That means that we're not listening to them. Right? If we are listening, then it takes a moment to digest what they say before we respond. That means if we are urgently coming with a response, then clearly we haven't listened properly. So it should not be an impulsive response, but it should be, a thoughtful. Let me think about that, right, for a moment, and then respond to them. You'll find, by the way, as I find sometimes, is, I'm not sure what to tell you. And then 5 minutes later in the conversation, suddenly it comes to me. I'm not sure why I didn't think about it 5 minutes earlier, but I didn't. But now I have something actually productive to share with them. The next one is ask and answer to the point. That if a person listens well, this is why this is the creation of a good interviewer. Someone who listens well asks good questions, insightful questions, because they're really listening. So they ask questions which are relevant to the story. They're not just tangential or surface level. They ask insightful questions. So they're asking to the point, and they answer to the point, because they're listening to what you're saying. So they're not just giving some flippant answer, but they're actually answering the real question, or that the other person is posing. The other, this is interesting, you may not think of this, is respond in order. This is discussed numerous times in the Torah. Al rishon rishon val achron achron. If you're really listening to someone well, the reason why they said the first thing first and the second thing and the second point second is for a reason. It may not be some deep intellectual reason, but something that's a reflection of who they are. When we are listening, we are also paying attention to the order of them, why they put this first and that second. And so when we respond to them, we respond in kind. First, second, second. That's why a wise person, when they answer, you see this in certain letters. When there are multiple questions that are asked, a wise person follows the same sequence that the questioner asks the questions. And then we have, say, I have not heard. This is a really hard one. This is a big self-oriented hang-up. Okay, I have this, I encounter this from time to time. Someone tells me something, and I can make believe I know it, like, I know what you're talking about, right? Even though I have no idea what they're talking about, right? Or I can say, wow, I never knew this. It requires a soul-oriented person, otherwise known as humility, to say, wow, I never knew that. Fearing that we're going to sound like we're an ignorant person, which is almost always not the case, but that's our fear, right? Or I have not heard is another way of saying, I don't understand what you're saying. Did you ever have someone tell you something and you don't really get what they're saying? Right? By the way, most often when you don't get what they're saying, there's a good chance what they're saying doesn't make sense. Just want to let you know that. I just heard, what's his name? Simon Sinek, I think his name is. Yeah, Simon Sinek. He just shared. He consults for these big corporations, and so he came to some meeting with all the tops of some company, and someone said something, and he had no. He just didn't understand what the guy was saying. So he told the guy, "Can you please repeat that? Because I really didn't understand what you said." And he discovered that no one in the room understood what he said. Right? So in other words, actually, what I'm saying is that you find out that you're a little bit more intelligent than you realize you are. And if you don't understand something, probably a lot of other people are not getting it as well, right? It's not like you're some, right? But regardless of that, having the humility to say, I don't understand what you're saying. I don't understand that, right? So all of these are very valuable. Figure 2.6, everyone. What page is that on? That is on page 72. Listening, these are the listening behaviors if you want to implement at least indicators that you're not listening well. Give me 1 second. Avoid interrupting, avoid responding impulsively, avoid unilaterally changing the subject, ask clarifying questions, maintain the order of the points, acknowledge new information, and be honest about not understanding. Yeah. 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 So one of my favorite words is productive. And that's a key word to be able to define whether something's appropriate or not. In almost any setting, you can always ask the question, is this productive? Everyone, I'm going to ask you for 5 extra minutes again. Okay? So is this productive? So if you've determined that this is not productive, which it sounds like it isn't, right? So then you need to develop tact in how to rein it in. You have to do it tactfully and respectfully. And there are people who are very good at it. They have that skill. And if you don't have it, pick it up, or I don't know, either speak to someone who does have it, or pick up a book or something that gives some tactics for it, and just learn how to do it. But the moment it's no longer being productive, then it needs to be reined in, because there's a bigger context than this person. So I have it in classes. I've been blessed, by the way. I have the most amazing students. I say that pretty seriously, by the way, but I did have years back certain individuals. You have people in the class that will sabotage the class. So they will come and they'll ask a long-winded question. Actually, they're making a statement. It's a 5-minute statement, and the whole class is, "Hello, we're in the middle of a class here," right? So part of what a teacher should do is rein in the person, which you want to find a tactful way to do it. It's not always easy to do. It's not comfortable, but we got to do what we got to do, as we say. Okay, so let's conclude let's just bring this class to a conclusion. If you go to exercise 2.3 on page 73, this is a good question for you to ask yourself. If you're planning on implementing this, which I hope you are, which items featured in figure 2.6 are you already good at? Okay, there are some you're going to be really good at by nature. And then there are 2 regarding which of those items could you use some improvement. Which of the items in figure 2.6 can use some improvement? Of the ones that you can use improvement, which one do you consider most critical for good listening? And once you determine that one, work with that one. That's a good place to start. You work with that one. Let's go to text 9. Alan, go for it. I'm sorry? Alan! The right guy at the right time.
A person once observed that a colleague needed to speak far more than he listened. So he told the fellow, "Notice the difference between your ears and your mouth. God created you with 2 ears but just a single mouth," implying that we should listen twice as much as we speak.
Very good. Here's what I'd like to conclude with. The same thing I concluded with last week. When we have cognitive empathy, emotional empathy some people have more intuitively than others, but cognitive empathy, I believe we can all develop. When we have cognitive empathy, it's a game changer in relationships. We are with the person, at least mentally, and understanding what they're going through. When we become a listener, where we really listen, we take the time to listen, we knock out all of the other important things in our life, and we say, you know what, I am going to be a listener for other people. That's who I'm going to be in this world. We're going to see it's going to be a game changer in relationships. And what we find is that so many of the things that we're trying to get in life, the irony is that we will get it from the things that we always fought doing because we thought it takes it away. Right? In business, you want to pick up a good client? Listen to the client. Listen to the client. Right? But really listen to the client. And help them with their personal matter. Forget about your sale. You're going to have a lifelong client. And I'm not saying like this is a hack and a trick. I'm saying we should just be listeners. Right? I'm speaking to myself, by the way, too. Right? We should just be solid listeners there for other people. There's nothing more beautiful we can bring to the world. One of the things, I'm going to conclude with this. One of the things that the Rebbe, who was one of the greatest leaders that the world has seen, never mind the Jewish people have seen, that the world has seen, right? One of the things that he did was he built his leadership. Of course, he spoke to masses of people, but he really built his leadership in many respects in his relating to one person at a time. He gave attention, like the smallest attention, to the smallest detail in someone's life that he knew about that they brought to his attention. He didn't forget it, and he paid attention to it. He really, really, really unbelievably listened to people. He really believed that the way you change things is by interacting with one person at a time. He believed this very, very much, that you change masses one person at a time. And that's the listening. And in some respect, I'll say for myself, I'm so busy trying to make a big impact that I sacrifice the one-on-one. And it's at the one-on-one that the mass impact actually happens. All right, thank you, everyone. And we'll, same time, same place next week. And I do want to invite you